Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews, where we review games both new and old on all platforms. If you like the content that I make, then please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a review when it comes out. Today we talk about Little Nightmares 2, which was just released this week. In my previous review, I talked about the predecessor, Little Nightmares 1, and gave that an absolute raving review and could not wait for its sequel. And it's finally out and promises us more scares, more enemies, and overall a grander adventure in skill and gameplay. But it might actually be that sometimes less is more, and that maybe by adding too much or being too ambitious, some sections might miss their mark or might not be as polished or good as one had hoped. Let's dive deeper into this unique game and see what it brings with it. In Little Nightmares 2, you no longer play as the yellow raincoat wearing child 6, but instead take control of a new protagonist in the form of Mono, a small boy with a paper sack over his head. The design of Mono is just as cute. It did not take me long to get used to playing as this new character. You wake up in a forest next to a TV and then head on out and discover that things are just as messed up here as they were in Little Nightmares 1. It doesn't take long until you rescue a tiny girl who will tag along for your adventure and help you solve all kinds of puzzles and progressing further. The weird thing is that the game kinda makes it out to be almost a secret who this girl is, as it takes a good 2 hours or so before you find the raincoat and it is revealed that she's in fact 6 from the first game. Now, why this is weird is because in all of the commercials, trailers, and screenshots, they never hit the fact that it was 6, so there was definitely no surprise on who this girl was, even without her raincoat. Together with 6, you move from the forest to a larger, sprawling city and need to get closer to an immense tower with a broadcasting signal on top that is sending these weird static imagery to everyone's TV in the city that brainwashes them. Along the way, you will be going through a school and a hospital, each with their own problems, enemies, and background lore. In terms of story, there's no dialogue nor any text explaining things, and though there is a lot more going on in the story in Little Nightmares 2, it's not necessarily as effective as the story and setting of Part 1. Part 1 was surprising with its enemies, for example revealing that there was not one, but instead were 2 chefs, or the masked woman hating her own face and therefore smashing all the mirrors. The twist with 6 becoming more evil as well was something probably not a lot of people saw coming, and the memorable ending also stuck with you. In here, the ending twist wasn't really a surprise, and anyone who probably played the first game might actually see it coming this time. I even talked about it in my review of Little Nightmares 1. But it isn't to mean that the story is bad. In fact, many of the locations you go to are incredible to explore, and the new enemies and monsters are more frightening than ever. This game definitely delivers on more creepy and grotesque enemies, and is by far way scarier than Little Nightmares 1. I did not really get jump scared, but I got very creeped out more than once or twice. Before we talk about gameplay, let's take a closer look at the graphics. Little Nightmares 1 was already a pretty game, but with 2, they upped the ante even more. The game looks absolutely gorgeous. Character models look super detailed with beautiful fluid animations. Lighting and shadows are incredibly realistic and atmospheric, with volumetric fog and rain effects really bringing a finishing touch. The game nails the aesthetic between a realistic sense and that of a cartoon. The depth of field is being used in such a way to make the world feel much more grand and spacious, with ominous shapes in the background, even more so than something like Inside. It feels like a proper breathing world now, instead of the claustrophobic ship The Maw in the first game. And also the art design is still as special as it was with the first one. Sound design is also amazing, with monsters making really scary noises, music being super spooky or threatening, and the overall presentation of this game is just absolutely top notch. Then what about the gameplay? Well, Little Nightmares 2 is still a puzzle platformer that mostly functions on a 2D space where you head from left to right, but more than ever, you have the option to head towards the rear of any location you are at. Sometimes you are able to even go down entire streets or patches of land to explore it in the back. There are also many more sections here where the action and camera shifts and you move in a vertical line instead of horizontally. Since you are now accompanied by 6, some of the obstacles you need to get through require the help of both of you. Sometimes you need to open a hatch or push in a door and it's too heavy on your own. Thus, the computer-controlled 6 will come near you and help you push. The computer is actually doing a really good job of controlling 6, and it never feels like an escort mission type of game. Also, sometimes 6 will run ahead or start climbing in order to show the player what they must do. Again, this is done without any voice or text and works brilliantly. Other obstacles require that old school co-op action, where 6 gives you a boost up to reach higher places, or require you to send 6 over to the other side of a gap, and she then reaches her hand out to grab you when you jump next. Honestly, the co-op gameplay type with 6 is very cool, but they are not in there as much as one would think. There are still lots of sections where you're playing on your own, making it all the more terrifying. Now, throughout your adventure, you will of course also stumble upon enemies. The first game only had a handful, and this game takes it up a notch and adds a whole bunch of new enemies, but not all of them are as memorable as those in the first game. You start with the hunter, who lives in the forest, and though his design is not that scary, since he's wearing a bag over his head, what he does in the forest definitely is very scary and disturbing. Early on, you can see hints of people being captured and killed in his traps, and he makes puppets out of them and sets them around his house. It's a classic nightmare psycho scenario, and it's really creepy and so effective. I absolutely love it. Next up, you will head into a school and meet 2 enemy types here. The small children, which are super quick and annoying and not necessarily all that great of an addition. But the real highlight of the entire game is the school head Mistress. The way she is introduced is also super menacing, with her taking full control over the school children and punishing anyone who does not behave. You can even get hints of the cruel things she does to the children that she has punished. But the real disturbing thing about the school mistress is that she has a neck which can go super long. The effect, look, and sound when this happens is so gross and menacing that it is really tense when you are hiding and she is searching the place by just moving her face and neck. They use this too in some brilliant moments where you are climbing a pile of books and need to move accordingly to her angle that she is searching. And then the real scary and intense climax is when she follows you through the vents in a chase that will haunt me for quite a while. But also just quiet moments are super creepy and nerve-wracking, where you are moving a small stool on wheels while she's playing piano and have to do it while she is playing to hide the sound of the furniture being moved. Then in the hospital, you meet also 3 new types of enemies, with one being the chopped off hands, which we will talk about later and also did not necessarily need to be added in my opinion. There's also the mortician, which though grotesque looking and he hangs from the ceiling, he did not leave that much of an impression on me. He's honestly not all that unique looking and probably the most generic of all the enemies in the game. But what will stick with you are the mannequins, which will only move in the dark, and they are so brilliantly introduced with you walking through many rooms with the mannequins where nothing happens. Then suddenly when the lights turn off, you start to see them move. And the brilliant thing too is that in every room you enter afterward, you never know which mannequins could be a threat or not. Unfortunately, the gameplay that accompanies these mannequins is not perfect, and I will address that in a moment. But the enemies themselves and the creep factor they add is definitely a welcome one. Then there are a few more enemy types that definitely also feel very unique and cool towards the end. And overall, the new enemies in this game are by far way more scary and menacing than the enemies in part 1. But because there are so many of them now, it doesn't mean that all of them are as memorable. I think in terms of enemies in general, this game is way scarier in that sense, but some of the enemies do miss their mark a bit when it comes to gameplay that is accompanied with them. Much of the puzzles are still physics-based, and the game is just as intuitive in the beginning as the first game. If you are not able to reach a certain ledge, you might be able to push a nearby box and jump on that first. Or if there is a button to open a door you cannot reach, you might be able to throw an object against the button and it will open for you. Most of the puzzles luckily still follow that same logic I talked about in the first review, to where logical thinking will help you through the puzzle since normal physics apply. A puzzle I for example really loved was the one where you had to set the chess pieces correctly on the board. You might be able to figure this out by setting it to checkmate, or if you search further, you will see a spreadsheet which you can pull up, which will reveal you the correct order of the pieces. Again, logical thinking will help you here further. Or for example, a large field covered in leaves, but you already know that there are bear traps. It's too far to jump, and walking through those leaves surely will get you killed. Luckily, there are many pine cones laying around, and so it's very intuitive and logical to use those items to throw and set up the bear traps. However, since the game is a lot bigger and longer, it also introduces new types of puzzles, and these don't always hit their right mark. Later on, you get to deal with some portal puzzles, which are fine and not too difficult, but it definitely turns into more trial and error type of puzzle solving instead of logical thinking. But the worst thing that was added in this game was the ability to pick up certain weapons and fight enemies with it. Now it sounds very cool and like a neat addition on paper. I mean, in the first game you were not able to fight back, so the fact that you can is actually really cool in and of itself. For the first few times where I handled an axe or hammer, I thought it was actually very cool. But the problem is that the controls are not accurate enough many of the times in where you can properly hit an enemy. The attacking animation is also super slow and feels very clunky. Now, this might be on purpose since the weapons that Mono is wielding are heavy and he's just a small child, but it can end up in some very frustrating scenarios where you are trying to hit an enemy and one miss is enough to get you killed and reset to where you have to fight them over again. The timing on when to hit them is also really dubious sometimes, and can sometimes feel more like luck. The first enemies you use these tools to combat are these freakish little children, and though it feels good to finally smash their annoying faces in, they will often stop right before they lunge and make a sound. Now, maybe this is a cue for you to strike or get into attack position, but again, it simply is not accurate enough to where you will definitely hit them, and in all likeliness, these sections will require quite a few retries from someone who plays it. Later on, you actually get to fight these crawling hands, like the Thing from the Addams Family, and these things are even worse. They take 3 hits to take out, and can actually dodge your attacks. Since the animation is so slow, and it takes a while to wind up your attack, it's very easy to make mistakes, and it feels very annoying to get killed in one shot after hitting the hand already twice, and then having to do all of that over again. The most gnarly part in the entire game was where Six tries to stop a hand coming from out of a locker, and you have to fight one hand on your own, but after hitting it twice, the second hand from the locker escapes, and you have to fight both of them. In the meantime, Six is prying wood off the wall to escape, but she's not able to pry the last one loose. Now you're supposed to fight both of the hands since only one of them needs one more hit, but it's really annoying fighting these both as they dodge, and with the inaccurate fighting controls and even some glitchy bullcrap where if both lunge at you from the same angle and you hit them, you only hit one and not both sometimes. And then you have to start that fight all the way over starting with one hand. I even managed one time in a miracle attempt to pry the wood off the wall with Six while the 2 hands were still alive, but my character would not go through the open hole and Six would literally just sit on the ground and do nothing. It's honestly a mechanic that I thought was not necessary in the game, and it might have actually been better without it. In a way, because Little Nightmares 1 is so short and tight, it's easier to perfect it. There were no frustrating parts in Little Nightmare 1, no frustrating or unclear puzzles, no parts where it slowed down or that did not feel like a great addition. With Little Nightmares 2, which is still really a good game, it unfortunately does suffer from there being parts now that are not as fun or frustrating by adding more in that sense. That's why here the phrase "sometimes less is more" is really applicable. Sure, Little Nightmares 1 is a lot smaller in gameplay and scope, but because of that, there's also a lot less wrong with it. I also got my character stuck in an object 4 times during my playthrough, whereas I never had that happen once with the first game. Another section in gameplay that doesn't work as well as I think they wanted to is the flashlight section. Now granted, atmospherically and in terms of scares, this section is absolutely brilliant, though does use a gimmick we have seen in other horror games. You head into rooms with these disgusting looking mannequins that will walk and run towards you when there's no light being shined upon them. So you have to shine your flashlight which you get at them while walking and adjust the angle as you walk around them. This is easy enough to do with one enemy, but you soon get to face 2, 3, or even more enemies at once. It kind of requires you to quickly switch your light between the targets to keep them from coming too close, but here too the controls are not accurate enough to where it feels responsive. It might also be done to add that panicked tension and forcing you to just flick the control stick wildly in the hopes it hits most enemies, but here too it can quickly end up in a one-hit kill and then you have to start the section over again. I've also had a couple of times where I clearly escaped in time, but the game magnetized me back to the enemy's hands, which was also pretty dumb. And though it sounds like I've been ranting on the game for a bit, I still have to say that I really loved the game and enjoyed my time with it. It's just simply the fact that the first game was such a near perfect gem, and this game gets maybe a bit too ambitious for itself and thereby shows some cracks in the formula which its smaller sister did not have. Nevertheless, I think it's an amazing horror game with such a unique setting and atmosphere, and it always keeps you guessing on what comes next and always has you curious on playing just a bit more to see what the next grotesque looking enemy is or what interesting environment you will be exploring next. It's definitely a must play for fans of Little Nightmares 1. But in the end, Little Nightmares 2 gets a 7.9. I'm a big fan of this studio's work, and since DLC has already been confirmed, I'm very curious where they will take the story next. I, for one, am very excited to return to this disturbing world and confront whatever creepy creature it is that the game throws at me next.